I can still hear the sharp edges of their voices, cutting through the quiet like knives. It was family dinner, the one night when I thought maybe, just maybe, I could belong. But that hope was a joke. They looked at me like I was some kind of disappointment, like I was carrying all their failures in my bones. "You're worthless," my own family said, as if those words could erase everything I was trying to be. It wasn't just what they said, it was the way they said it, like I was already dead inside and they were just acknowledging the fact. I sat there, the food growing cold on my plate, feeling smaller with every passing second, wishing I could disappear into the cracks of that worn-out table. My hands trembled, but I forced myself to keep my eyes on them, to pretend it didn't hurt. But it did, more than I could say. That night, I realized that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most can be the ones who make you feel the least. I was invisible, forgotten, nothing. And in that moment, I didn't just lose my dignity, I lost the part of myself that believed I could ever be enough. But then, just when I thought the night couldn't get any worse, something unexpected happened. My dad's boss showed up, Mr. Reynolds. He was a man who commanded respect just by walking into a room, and honestly, I wasn't sure why he was even there. Maybe Dad had invited him for dinner, or maybe it was some work thing. I don't know. What I do know is how everything changed the second Mr. Reynolds spoke to me. I was sitting there, barely holding myself together, when he glanced my way. I tried to shrink further into my chair, hoping to stay invisible, but then he said it. "Ma'am." The way he said it wasn't just polite, it was deliberate, loaded with respect and recognition. He didn't see me as the useless daughter my family had made me out to be. He saw me as someone worthy of dignity, and that hit me harder than any insult ever could. The room seemed to freeze for a moment. My family's eyes flickered with confusion, maybe even a little discomfort, as if they were unsure how to react to this outsider giving me the respect they refused to. I could feel the weight of their silence pressing down on me, but it wasn't the same kind of heavy anymore. It was different. It was the weight of possibility. For a split second, I caught a glimpse of who I might be if I stopped listening to their cruel words. The image was unfamiliar but magnetic. Mr. Reynolds didn't know me, hadn't seen the years of pain or the nights spent questioning my own worth. Yet, with one word, he gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time: validation. I remember how my heart pounded in my chest, a mix of disbelief and hope swirling inside me. Could I really be someone worth respecting? Did that one word change how I saw myself, or did it just crack open the door to a new way of thinking? Either way, I couldn't ignore it. That "ma'am" echoed in my head long after dinner ended, louder than the whispers of disappointment that had haunted me for years. It wasn't just a word, it was a mirror, reflecting back a version of me I'd been too scared to believe in. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. The invisible girl at the table started to stand a little taller, breathing in a fresh air that didn't taste like shame. That night, in the middle of the family drama, a single word from a stranger became my first step toward reclaiming myself. After that night, the word "ma'am" wouldn't leave my mind. It echoed in every quiet moment, clashing with the harsh voices I'd heard at the dinner table. I felt torn, like there were two versions of me battling for control. One was the girl who had spent years swallowing insults, believing every cruel word like it was gospel. The other was someone new, someone who, for the first time, caught a glimpse of her own worth reflected back by a stranger's respect. I started to question everything I thought I knew about myself. Was I really worthless, or had I been living inside a cage built from my family's disappointment? The hardest part wasn't just hearing those words, it was believing them. But what if they were wrong? What if I wasn't broken? That simple title, "ma'am," felt like a key in my hand, but I was afraid to unlock the door it opened. At night, when the house was silent and the walls stopped echoing their insults, I lay awake wrestling with these feelings. Could I actually be someone deserving of respect? How had I let their opinions drown out my own voice for so long? I felt like I was standing at a crossroads, one path leading back to the familiar pain of their judgment, the other leading into the unknown, where I might have to fight for my own worth. But fighting scared me. What if I wasn't strong enough? What if pushing back just made things worse? And yet, the more I thought about Mr. Reynolds and the way he looked at me, the more I realized I had to try. I couldn't keep living in the shadow of their words, watching myself shrink every time they spoke. I wanted to believe that respect wasn't just a gift from others, but something I could claim for myself. I began small. The next day, I caught my reflection in the mirror longer than usual. Instead of turning away from the tired eyes and shaky smile, I looked at myself like I was meeting a stranger who deserved kindness. I practiced saying "ma'am" quietly, feeling the power in that word seep into me. It was strange, almost like learning a new language, but it gave me something to hold on to. Inside, I was still fragile, still unsure. But that night, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen. And that feeling, awkward, new and fragile, was enough to keep me going. To understand why that dinner cut so deep, you have to know the story behind my family, the tangled history that shaped us and honestly broke me. My family wasn't perfect. Far from it. We had wounds that ran so deep, they felt like they were stitched into every conversation, every look, every silence. It wasn't just that they said I was worthless. It was years of small things, the little cracks that slowly chipped away at my confidence until all that was left was the echo of their disappointment. My dad, for example, was a man who wore his pride like armor. He worked long hours, swallowed his frustrations, and expected the same quiet strength from all of us. But beneath his gruff exterior was a pressure cooker of unmet dreams and bitterness that often spilled over in ways I didn't understand as a kid. He never meant to hurt me, I think. But his way of showing love was twisted. He demanded perfection and dismissed anything less as failure. My mom, on the other hand, was quieter but no less sharp. She had her own battles, dreams deferred, sacrifices made, and instead of softness, she carried a weight that made her distant, even cold at times. She looked at me like I was a reminder of the things she lost or never got to be. I learned early on that showing weakness or asking for help wasn't an option. I was supposed to be strong, but their version of strong was something I could never live up to. And my siblings? They weren't. All of this shaped the person I was at that dinner, the girl who sat silently while her family unloaded their judgments. But it also made me crave something different, something better. The respect Mr. Reynolds showed me that night was so foreign because it was what I never got at home. It was the first time someone outside my family saw me as a person worthy of kindness and dignity. That moment cracked open all the old wounds, but also hinted at healing. I started piecing together why they treated me the way they did. Maybe it wasn't just cruelty. Maybe it was their own pain and fear. Maybe they didn't know how to see me as anything more than a reflection of their disappointments. But knowing this didn't make it hurt any less. If anything, it made the silence heavier. It made me realize that if I wanted to change how I was treated, I might have to change how I saw them, and more importantly, how I saw myself. It was a complicated mix of love, resentment, hope, and heartbreak. I love my family, but I also needed to break free from the story they wrote about me. And that night, the night Mr. Reynolds said "ma'am," was the beginning of that break. It was the first spark in the long fight to reclaim my identity from the shadows of my past. After that night, something inside me stirred, a quiet rebellion that I hadn't felt before. It wasn't like I suddenly stood up and shouted back at my family or made grand gestures. No, it started in the smallest ways, the moments nobody else noticed but me. I began to notice how I carried myself, straightening my shoulders, holding my head a little higher when I walked into a room. I started answering back softly when someone tried to dismiss me, not with anger but with a calm firmness that surprised even me. The first time I did it, I felt like my heart was going to burst out of my chest. My sister made a snide comment about my job, something cruel and unnecessary, and instead of shrinking away like usual, I met her eyes and said, "I'm proud of what I'm doing." It wasn't loud or confrontational, but it was enough to silence the room for a moment. That small victory tasted sweeter than anything I'd felt in a long time. I found myself seeking out moments where I could prove to myself that I wasn't the girl they said I was. I started taking on challenges at work that I would have once avoided, raising my hand in meetings, and speaking up with ideas that I'd been too scared to share before. Every time someone called me "ma'am" again, at the store, on the phone, or just passing by, it reminded me that respect wasn't just an accident. It was something I could earn and own. But it wasn't just about proving them wrong. It was about proving to myself that I deserved better. I began setting boundaries. No more staying silent when I was hurt. No more pretending that their words didn't cut me deep. It was messy and hard. There were days when the weight of old shame pressed down like a storm, threatening to drown me in doubt again. But each time, I remember that dinner table and that word that changed everything. Slowly, I built a new version of myself, not the invisible girl, but someone who could stand in her own light, even if it flickered. I found friends who saw me, who lifted me up instead of tearing me down. I invested time in things that made me feel alive, like writing and volunteering. Every step was a fight against the story my family tried to write for me. And then came the moment when I realized I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for the idea that no one should have to feel worthless just because the people who are supposed to love them can't see their value. That realization fueled me like nothing else. It gave me the courage to dream again, to plan for a future where I wasn't defined by my past or their words. That fire inside me started to burn brighter, and for the first time, I saw that my story was mine to write. Not their version, not the one filled with shame and silence, but my own, full of strength, hope, and the kind of respect that starts from within. The moment I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer came one evening a few weeks after that dinner. The air in the house was thick, stale with old grudges and unspoken resentments, and I was tired. Tired of pretending I was okay when I wasn't. Tired of letting their words shape my world. I'd been holding on to that quiet rebellion, the small sparks of confidence, but it wasn't enough anymore. I needed something more. I needed to be seen, not as the worthless girl they said I was, but as myself. It started small, almost by accident. My dad made one of his usual comments about how I should have done better, how I was a disappointment. My stomach twisted, but this time, instead of swallowing my hurt or nodding along, I looked him in the eye and said, "I'm not who you think I am." The room went silent. My mom paused mid-sentence. My siblings stopped whatever they were doing, and even my dad blinked like he hadn't expected me to speak back. I could feel their shock, maybe even anger, but I didn't back down. I kept going. 4 years, I've been carrying your disappointment like it was my fault, but I'm done letting your words decide my worth. I'm not invisible. I'm not worthless. And I'm not going to stay quiet just because it's easier for you. The words hung in the air, heavy and raw. For the first time, I saw something in their faces that I hadn't before. Confusion, maybe guilt, but also something like understanding. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a movie moment where everything instantly fixed itself. But it was real. It was the first crack in the wall they'd built around me. My dad's voice was rough when he finally spoke. "You think you can just change everything with words? Life doesn't work like that." "I'm not trying to change life," I said. "I'm trying to change how I live in it. For me, not for you." That night, we didn't solve all our problems. There were no hugs or apologies, no sudden epiphanies. But something shifted. The tension didn't vanish, but it loosened, just enough for me to start breathing a little easier. Afterward, I felt a strange mix of relief and fear. Relief because I'd finally spoken my truth. Fear because I didn't know what would come next. Would they push back harder? Would this make things worse? But underneath it all was a quiet pride. For the first time, I owned my voice, and no matter what happened, I wasn't going to let it be silenced again. That confrontation was my breaking point and my breakthrough. It didn't erase the past or fix everything overnight, but it marked the moment I stopped being a victim of their judgments. I started standing for myself, even when it was hard, even when it felt like I was walking into a storm. And that storm, as scary as it was, became the forge where I was remade, not by their words, but by my own courage. In the days and weeks that followed that confrontation, I found myself slowly, almost imperceptibly, changing. The weight I'd carried for so long, the shame, the silence, the feeling of being less than, started to lift like a fog finally clearing after a storm. It wasn't magic, and it wasn't sudden. There were still hard moments, days when old wounds ached, and the echoes of those family dinners threatened to pull me back. But I was different now, stronger, more certain. I began to see my reflection, not through their harsh eyes, but through my own. The woman staring back at me was someone who had survived pain and rejection and still chose to believe she was worthy. Someone who was learning to love herself in spite of everything. The respect Mr. Reynolds, showed me that night had sparked something, but it was my own will, my own fight, that kept the fire burning. I started making plans, small at first, but full of promise. I thought about going back to school, chasing the dreams I'd buried beneath layers of doubt. I reconnected with people who lifted me up and started building a life where I wasn't defined by my family's judgment, but by my own values and strength. And maybe most importantly, I began to forgive, not just them, but myself. Forgive myself for believing their words for so long, for letting their opinions shape who I was. Forgive my family for their flaws and the ways they hurt me, even if those wounds didn't disappear overnight. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting or excusing. It meant freeing myself from the chains of bitterness, so I could finally breathe. Looking back, that night at dinner, with all its pain and shame, was a turning point. The moment Mr. Reynolds said, "Ma'am," wasn't just about a word. It was about seeing a future I hadn't dared to imagine. A future where I mattered. A future where I could stand tall. I don't have all the answers yet, and my family's story isn't finished. But now, I'm writing the next chapters with my own hand, with hope, with courage, and with the knowledge that I am enough. And that, finally, makes all the difference.